I can sit there until we're ready. And I can also do this.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the Talbot County Board of Education monthly work session. It is Monday, May 19th. We are in at TCEC in conference room 1. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. As you can see, we have a quorum present. Everybody's here minus 2. That makes a quorum. And if we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, that would be great. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
A motion.
Second.
Tonight's.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We did not have a work session in April, so there are no minutes to approve, just so you know. That's why we're skipping that part. We're going to move right ahead to our work session topics of discussion, starting with our consent agenda introduction.
So I'll jump in with good evening, everyone. So this is the first time that we are using our consent agenda exercises, I should say. And so the explanation is here on the slide, which you could see the purpose of this is to better distribute presentations between work session, which we have on the third Monday, and our regular board meetings, which are the third Wednesday, in an effort to reduce the amount of time required at the regular board meeting for presentations, voting on information that was previously discussed, and which the board may deem important for informational purposes, but not requiring like extensive discussion or explanation. And so we will walk through what that means this evening as we go through that. And again, on Wednesday, when we actually do our voting with the consent agenda. So the consent agenda items will be presented this evening and moving forward will be presented at work session meetings. It's information purposes only. No voting will take place when we talk about these items. If required, voting on these items will take place at the regular board meeting on Wednesday. So again, what we're presenting this evening is just informational only, and the voting will take place on Wednesday if necessary. There may be some items that don't require a vote, but we will be talking about them informationally at the work session this evening.
Can I ask a point of clarification? We talked about this when we first talked about doing the consent agenda. If there is a specific item that requires further discussion during the board meeting, we can ask for that to be discussed outside of the consent agenda, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
There are two board members who are missing this evening who I think
Correct.
would like to discuss some of the things that are in the consent agenda, so that will probably come back up on Wednesday.
Correct. That'll be fine. Yep. So I will go ahead and start, and actually with a preface that tonight a lot of our consent agendas will revolve around our policies. So we have a policy committee that meets every month, the first Wednesday of every month, and we will continue to do so during the summer months. We have a lot of policies that we're going through and we're updating them, and we have a pretty good, well-oiled machine right now as to how we're reviewing policies, how we're updating them, and then how they come to the board. So this evening will be a host of policies that the policy committee has gone over at our May policy committee meeting. We went over them, the policy that is associated with the specific department. That lead went over any changes. And so they may briefly, I'm going to ask them to just highlight some of those changes just so you'll know. Any questions or information I will field and go through as we go through the different policies that will come up on Wednesday for our consent agenda. So we'll start with distribution of materials 11.6. Which will be up for a second reader on Wednesday. But Ms. Gardner kind of led this conversation with the policy committee when we met for May. And so, Ms. Gardner, if you could just highlight the changes that we discussed.
Thank you. The main thing about this revision is just that we move the responsibility for approving flyers that are distributed through our communications channels in schools to the communications office from the superintendent's office. So that the most of the changes that you see reflect that, and also just updating the way that we distribute information, because when this policy was created in 2012, there was a lot more still distributed on paper or in school offices, and now we try whenever possible to distribute things electronically. So that's factored in here as well. And I think that that's the main thing. Then just updating contact persons in the policy and the AR. And then we did make one additional revision since we presented it at the board meeting initially. Dr. Pepperkai, I think that's on the next slide. Oh. So we had, and this question came up actually when we were presenting it, the policy initially, but we had a separate policy that was distribution of printed material in the schools, that it needed to be, this needed to be approved by the principal. And we basically just moved that to the AR because it fell more in line with AR than being a standalone policy in and of itself. So, so that will mean that we will retire policy 7.7, which was just that one sentence about the principal approving material distributed in the school to staff via the school mailboxes.
Also, what you'll note that right here, reviewed May 10th, 2010. So a lot of the policies that we are bringing to you, things have changed over the last 10, 15 years. And so we are bringing those things up to date and pulling out, deleting, scratching out things that are no longer relevant. So you'll see that common theme with some of the policies that we'll be bringing forward.
Yeah, I think the distribution of printed material in school mailboxes has also diminished substantially. There may be some, but primarily things are shared electronically by email or into internal communications platforms.
Before we go on, can you hear me? Okay, good. Looking at the policy for this one, it might have just been an oversight, or maybe I'm just reading it incorrectly. But when you look at Roman numeral 2 standard, it says organizations may request permission to distribute information, and I'm not sure if you want it to say may versus shall or should, because in your AR, it's conflicting because the AR says must.
Probably that's a good point. We probably should revise that. I'm not sure why it says may to begin with. I think it's just I think it's just allowing for the possibility of organizations to do it, that they may request permission, but maybe we should make that more clear and say must. Yes, I
I'm
agree.
thinking so.
Yeah.
Or else you're going to have organizations who are just going to distribute it and say that your policy says may. And
Thank you.
then the other thing just may be a grammatical oversight too. This is Roman numeral 3, material guidelines. It says all materials must identify the name of the governmental agency, and I think it should say or.
Is that in the AR?
It is, yes.
Okay. I don't have
And
that.
it's not a change, so that's why I don't want it to get missed. It looks like it's probably been there for a
I'm
while.
sorry, I don't have that.
So
open
is
there.
that Roman numeral 3 on the AR and what letter?
Oh, no, yeah, there it is. Okay, good.
Where is it?
Yeah, so it looks like maybe we might have had an old copy into our agenda, but Roman numeral 3 for us, where it says or,
I'm
actually
trying
says
to look.
IR.
What, oh, right, C? Is it C?
3A. All
Right here.
materials must identify the name of the governmental agency, and then it says IR on the
Got
one
it.
that I have. So maybe you have a
Oh, but
more
there it
recent
says or.
copy.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for noticing that too. But I think we have it correct on the current version.
Okay, thanks. All right. Any other? Yep.
I'm wondering how to phrase this. A lot of schools, individual schools, have Facebook pages run by their PTOs. Does this, so that's technically not the school, it's the PTO. Does this policy govern what the PTO is putting out? Does that fall under that, or how does that relate to the above policy?
The schools coordinate with the PTOs on what they are able to distribute. This is really referencing distribution, approval of distribution of external materials versus the PTOs are more of an internal organization.
Well, I'm thinking of, it seems to be the intent of this policy is to kind of standardize what we're doing per building and make sure that the same information is available to all students. And I'm thinking about what I've seen various PTO pages post, some posts about, well, this sports organization is doing tryouts, or this is doing, this thing. And again, innocuous, not troublesome, but I just want to make sure that everybody is accessing the policy in the same way or instituting it in the same sort of fashion. Like specifically Chapel, which I see the most, it's where, my littlest goes, and their page is very active. There's a page for Chapel District, the school, and there's a page for the Chapel District PTO, and they tend to post things about, a variety of things happening at the school or things that are available to the community on their page. And I want to make sure that's still available. I think a lot of people get information that way, that it's not being shut down by this policy.
No, not at all. I mean, if the school is distributing something, the PTO can also share, especially using Facebook. That's one of the things that's so different about now versus when this policy was originally created. So if something is approved for distribution through the school's newsletter and/or social media, mostly the flyers are through their newsletters, but you're right, some do post them on their social media, but not all do. So we do want to sort of take another look at our overarching guidelines for social media use by the schools and by supporting organizations such as PTOs. Not all schools have those organizations, but we have a lot of supporting organizations that have their own Facebook pages, like the bands programs and chorus and theater and all of that. So it's kind of a lot to have it all aligned, but we want to try to work on that in the coming year as well.
That's great. I'm happy to hear that. I just want to make sure an unintended consequence is not that we shut down this, sharing of information. Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you. All right, thanks, Ms. Gardner, for that. We will move on to our next policy, which will be up for a second reader. This is Educational Equity 1.6. And so, Dr. Einhorn, you could just share some of again, this is a policy that went before the policy committee and got a lot of feedback, and now this is what's come forth.
There were no additional changes made to the policy or AR since it was presented on first reader. The policy committee had looked at it prior to the first reading at the board meeting. It has also been reviewed by the Citizens Advisory Committee and school administrators to ensure that it's aligned with the direction we're going with our strategic plan, vision, mission, but also brings us into compliance with COMAR, which states that we need to update our educational equity policy every 3 years. The AR is aligned with COMAR, but also pulls in language from the MABE sample policy, which is associated with each one of the components of COMAR.
A couple questions about adding things to this based on what I'm using my work as my basis, with adding things such as familiar status, physical or mental disability, citizenship, ethnic origin, and genetics. And then I wasn't sure if GEDs were included in this because I didn't know if we would have to add military status for that. And then somewhere in here, and I didn't mark where it was, there was a sentence structure that was kind of odd. It ended, I have to try to find it, but I'll come back to that. But then wherever that sentence structure was, it was what TCPS is going to do to eradicate these inequities. And so my question is, if somebody read that, what would be our response to work to eradicate these inequities? Because people are probably going to ask, what are we going to do? What are those steps going to be?
So I'll jump in, and just a point of clarification. So what you're referring to is this paragraph right here. You're saying, I see the work to eradicate these inequities. So with every policy, we then have our ARs, which are the steps that so these would answer that question. But I want to make sure that what you said before this one, you're making suggestions to add verbiage? Okay, and so you just listed that, I guess? Okay, and yeah, and I didn't capture it.
Can you repeat the verbiage that you were asking for? I couldn't hear you clearly.
So, again, this is based on, I'm not clear if GEDs are included in this. So if they are, it would be familiar status, and that would also apply to some students. That's somebody who may be pregnant and or already have a child in school. Physical or mental disability,
We
citizenship,
have disabling condition.
ethnic origin, genetics,
ethnic.
and then military status. And again, for GED, marital status.
So the inclusion of the identifiers in here are based on aligning this with our TCPS non-discrimination policy. And that truly was the impetus for what's there, so that we're having connection between and among our policies that we're stating. In terms of adding additional things, that was, the committee talked about several others because there are districts in the state of Maryland that include additional characteristics there. But ultimately decided to ensure that we had that alignment. So that's their explanation behind that. As to whether or not something else should be added, I would say would be a board decision.
Boards. And I guess for me, showing up curious and trying to understand when you're saying GED and all that comes with that. I'm trying to understand that.
Do our policies include students who are getting their GEDs?
Well, I haven't seen that specific verbiage. That could be, and I'm going to probably defer to Dr. Einhorn, that probably would be understood that it would, but I've never seen it stated.
Well, I mean, we don't have to put GED in there, but that was my
But making sure
thinking.
making
Right.
sure that this covered what you're saying. Gotcha.
Those other.
Okay, yeah, right. Mhm. Yeah, thanks for bringing that to the surface, though, because I think now moving forward, I think we have to, in our conversation, making sure what we're writing covers that lens. Okay. Anyone else?
I'm not against adding categories to this list, and I would want to see our non-discrimination policy follow suit. I think that the fact that they match is important for continuity. Some of the things that you brought up are already in there. Disabling condition, I think, is
I
a
saw that.
large
Yep,
umbrella.
exactly.
Military status is not something we've ever spoken about before, and I think that would be an interesting category to add to. I think it requires a lot more discussion about each individual category that you are bringing up, because each one, I think, it should be discussed on its own merits or intentions. And as I said before, want to make sure that there are not unintended consequences by adding that specific category to the policy. But I am very open for discussing all of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we've captured that. Okay.
I was approached by somebody with a comment on this policy that I think is worth discussing. And before we do, is there any state mandated language in here that cannot be changed, or is this all created in response and with other policies that are already made?
So the language in here can be changed. We tried to stay true to the COMAR and using the MABE language as well from the sample policy.
Okay. The question that I was approached with, and I would like the board to discuss what they think about this, is in the first paragraph, the last sentence, the Board of Education acknowledges the educational equity and excellence for every TCPS student is achieved through policies, procedures, and practices that eliminates obstacles and ensures equitable access to educational opportunities. The word that stuck out was obstacles, and this person talked about a few current obstacles that exist that are barriers in their mind to students receiving an appropriate educational opportunity. Specifically, they called out cell phones, saying that cell phones are an obstacle to people receiving an equitable education. we've talked about cell phones before. I just, as an individual, I was not going to respond to that, but I think it's worth bringing up to the board and seeing what you all think about that, whether that's a word that we leave in there or whether that's,
Or practices that work to eliminate obstacles? Because we are working towards that.
Yeah, and really, the word obstacles can be subjective. And when we're saying that we're eliminating them, I guess I could understand the individual's perspective. However, I wouldn't be opposed to saying work to eliminate obstacles. But I think we should
Right,
keep that
I
in
see
there,
right
or
here.
barriers.
That work to eliminate right here, yeah. That work to eliminate obstacles, so adding that.
I would agree with that, with what both of you just said.
Okay, anything else? Okay. All right, thanks for that input. So we will move to the next one. Let's see, second reader, investments. And Ms. Jones came to the policy committee and discussed this.
So at the last board meeting, we went through this. This was, these policy changes were designed originally to make the policy itself more succinct and pull out some of the detail into a newly created AR. And at the last board meeting, it was suggested that we put a couple things back into the policy itself. So that is what we've done. And we reviewed that with the investment committee. I will point those out to you specifically. It doesn't show on the screen, but if you're looking at it
Yeah, and you're diligent.
online,
Yeah, you should have it linked in.
we have moved back into the policy at Roman numeral 2 out of the AR, a statement which indicates the persons identified as investment officers who can make investment transactions. And investment officers are identified in our finance department written policies. Currently, I am the only one that is authorized to make investment decisions. Also, we moved back into the policy at Roman numeral 3 from the AR, a requirement that the board receive quarterly reports on investment activity. Last I checked with the board secretary, we had not received any public comments on this.
For CYA, is it ideal to have somebody to talk to with those investments? I don't know. I'm trying to think of how to word that right.
We have really limited options. So our options, we're legally allowed to do like two things. In what we've done currently, what our policy allows is to invest at MLGIP, which is the Maryland Local Government Investment Pool. So we pull all excess, we keep a certain amount liquid at the bank, that sweeps overnight, but I try to minimize that, and I keep the majority of our excess cash at the MLGIP investment trust, which is where the state of Maryland, where any local government or state government in Maryland invests there. So those are all basically treasury products. So they're very, very, I won't say they're risk-free, but they're very, very safe. They're the least risk. Yeah, they are secured by treasury bonds. One thing that the policy update does do is it does give us a little more flexibility. But again, they're highly, highly secure assets, and it's going to allow us to invest in what's called an insured cash sweep, which is a product where Shore United retains more of our funds, but it's still fully FDIC insured, and the investment rate of return mirrors the rate of return up at MLGIP, but it allows us to keep the money locally invested.
Does the Maryland bond rating affect us any at that? Because it's been downgraded.
We invest in U.S. Treasuries, so it should not.
All right, any other investment questions? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. Thank you. All right, so that concluded our policies reviews for second reader. I know we do have 2 missing board members, so we may have to bring up some of those things on Wednesday versus a bundle vote, but again, for consent agenda, how it goes all together, the things that we're talking about, plus other things we haven't gotten to, will be bundled as one vote for consent agendas.
We made a slight one-word change
Yeah.
to the equity policy. Will that come out of consent agenda so that, or
I-
will it?
So I think you could do, and I would have to look up the Roberts on this. I think you could do consent agenda. I make a motion that we vote with the approved consent agenda items with the noted changes. So, but I'll double check that. Moving on to Sodexo contract renewal.
Okay, so it's that time of year where we renew our Sodexo contract. Sodexo is our food service management company in all of our schools, and we renew it in the May-June timeframe for the upcoming school year. The way it works is we went out to bid in 2021 for starting with the 2022 school year, and then we're allowed up to 4 renewals. And this is our year 4 renewal. So this time next year, we'll be spending our spring going through an RFP process if we want to stay with a food service management company. So our contract provides that Sodexo has to make a guaranteed return to us of, I think it's $300,000. So that is profit that comes back into our food service management fund. And in turn, they charge us a few things. They charge us a management fee based, which is that proposed 2.75 cents per meal. And they also, that's a per meal. And then they also charge us a flat management fee. So they are allowed to increase that only by the CPI index for the food delivered to homes. And that, I checked that increase, it is 3.8%. And so that's what they're proposing to increase their contract by. It does not change. We will still get the guaranteed minimum.
I have a question. As we learned, you have to take certain things off the line for it to count as a meal. Does that translate to our reimbursement rate from them and or our cost per meal, or are we charged per a la carte item? How does that all come out in the wash?
So USDA guidelines dictate how we can claim a meal. So for them to be able to charge us for a meal, a child has to have certain elements on their plate. And that's really to make sure that a kid is getting a well-rounded, well-balanced meal, right? They've got to get grain, protein, fruit and vegetable. And there's a certain thing for certain formula, if you will, for breakfast and a certain formula for lunch. So they ensure that happens. And then, yes, so that's all factored in. So when a student fulfills that and gets a full lunch, we get charged for one meal. If they go back and buy an a la carte item, they make some profit on that themselves. We get some money ourselves. So they charge us for the a la carte item, whatever their cost is, or whatever their price to us is, and we get the rest of the revenue. If that makes sense.
So there's like one formula for a meal and one different set of numbers or guide for a la carte items.
Right. So if they're selling some ice cream, popular item in the elementary schools especially, they will charge us a price related to that ice cream, and then they make. Let me think about that. I don't know. Say it's $1. They charge the student $1. We collect the $1, and then they're going to bill us, their 50 cents or whatever. That's separate and apart from this. That's just gravy on top of this. Yeah.
I understand that. I'm just looking at like the management fee plus the current CPI. What are we? How is that calculated? Is it only based on meal? Or?
It's based on meals, but what I will say is to a certain to a certain extent, when you start adding extra, well, I'd like a second hamburger, a second this, that, to a certain extent, they'll piece those together and say, well, we sold so many of those items, that's going to count as this many meals. So I don't know, you sell an extra 100 pieces of pizza, that's going to, they have a formula, and that'll, translate into a certain number of meals that they'll charge a management fee to us on.
If possible, I would like to spend the next year while we move into our next contract renewal, really digging into what school lunch looks like. And I know that we have been invited as a board to eat in the cafeteria before. I would like to do that again, but I also would like to have an opportunity to talk about what it looks like in the middle of the day practice, as opposed to a very nice presentation to the board. I think they are two different things, as reported by the students that I know. And I think it's always a hot topic among students. What are we serving for lunch, and what do we get? What do we not get? But I think there are some legitimate questions that have been raised along the way, and I'd like an opportunity to ask those in a way that feels like we are getting an authentic answer to what the student's experience is. And I'm glad that we have a year to do that. So my request to you is if we could set up some opportunities within the next year to really dig into that, that would be great.
Maybe we could do that. I know those days you do the walkthroughs are very hectic, busy days, but maybe, we could take that as an opportunity to have lunch without a lot of forewarning to Sodexo, just to, okay, we're going to have lunch here today.
I would like to see not only what is being served and what our options are without any warning, but also I'd like to have an opportunity to observe what the kids are doing, because in my experience, the way that Sodexo has explained the way they explain lunch and explained how they give guidance and what we have to take and what kids are taking is different than what I see on my own bill from what my kids are actually taking. And when asked about it, their pushback is, well, I didn't know that, or they didn't tell me that, or I didn't see that. And that may just be a kid thing. It might be right on the wall, right in front of them. They might have actually been told that. But I'm curious to see it firsthand. Yeah.
And I believe the meals look different per school as well. So I'm not sure if, during that experience, if we may want to split up. I'm not sure about eating at every school, but it would be beneficial to be able to see the experience per school.
Yeah.
The other thing I had a question about, two things. What the management fee actually includes, like what does that really give us outside of the reimbursement? And then other than that, my question is, does that also include our children who have free and reduced meals?
Yes, they charge their per meal fee on all meals. We get reimbursed. We don't get paid by the children, but we get paid by the government for those meals.
Right, so is that reimbursement based on the regular rate, or is that based on the reduced rate? Okay.
Nope, every meal is charged at the same rate because their costs don't change. It doesn't matter to them if the child is paying or not paying. They've got their labor costs, they've got management costs, they've got their, all their food cost. So that's kind of what's going into the management fee. That's meant to cover their cost, basically.
An operating cost?
Yeah, so I get a monthly bill from them, and it's broken out, and I can see food cost, and I can see the cost of the containers that they're using and the silverware and all of that stuff. So the consumables, if you will, but I get information on all their labor cost and all of that, so it covers everything. The only thing we charge to the food service fund, which is a fund within our set of books, besides the Sodexo, is I think I mentioned during budget time when we were talking about needing to add a person in the finance staff, a quarter of my salary goes to the food service fund because that is a job that takes a decent amount of my time. And I have two people who half of each of their salaries goes to this fund because there's a lot, it's a very regulated function that we provide. Understandably, I mean, you want to make sure there's consistency. We're providing the right meals and all of that. There's a lot of training that we all sit through. So those are the other things that go into the food service fund. But we still have a surplus in that fund, and we're only allowed to use it in certain ways. One of the ways we use it is to make cafeteria improvements. So that's why Easton High got an upgrade a couple years ago. This year, Easton Middle and St. Michael's Middle got an upgrade next year. St. Michael's Elementary and White Marsh are getting upgrades. So we're spreading that money throughout each of the cafeterias to just make them look more appealing. Also, the equipment that we buy with that to update the lines, as they say, gives them the opportunity to offer different types of things. It's really very cool. I mean, sometimes the equipment is, a thing that's like a flat thing, and you can either make it cold to keep things on top of it cold, or you can make it hot to make things hot. So it's kind of cool, and they're definitely changing their offerings. And to answer, or it wasn't really a question, but your observation's right. They do some differentiation among the schools, and it's a little bit based on who's in the schools and what they might like. And they try different things from time to time in the schools, and sometimes it's a hit at one school and not a hit at the other school. So it just kind of depends.
Well, I have to say today I was at Easton Middle School, and I went in the cafeteria during lunchtime because the kids, I had my student advisory, and they were eating pizza, and it looked pretty tasty. So I sauntered down to the cafeteria, and I was talking to the Sodexo staff, and bought a slice of pizza. It was pretty tasty, and I was kind of looking at the different things that they had on display. I saw some yogurt parfait, cups of vegetables, but that was like in the middle of the day, so they didn't know I was coming. I just went in, and the pizza, I mean, maybe my timing was great, but they pulled out like a fresh, hot cheese pizza, and it was really good. So.
Anybody else?
I
Questions?
just want to say I'm very impressed with Sodexo and that junior chef competition that they do. That is such a highlight for those kids, and I love watching them. They're so excited, and the prizes they give are fabulous, and I think that's a wonderful program they offer.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Jones. What do
All
we have
right.
next?
Okay, next we have, I know it says Mrs. Jones, but I think Mr. Schaefer, you're going to present information update on our auditorium lighting project.
Yes, good evening, everybody. It's going to be a shared presentation between Mrs. Jones and myself. So I'm just going to quickly go through the current contract. It's really a proposal at this point from Barbizon Lighting Company, which is the vendor that would be installing the new lighting system at Easton High School auditorium. So, excuse me, the process has been a long one, and I'm going to try to make this quick, but so originally the project was approved as part of the FY25 CIP request through the council. At that time, it was roughly $815,000. These are just round numbers. And you can see now that it has gone up significantly. The original budget number came from February of 23. So, obviously prices have changed, and there are some tariff impacts in this current pricing. But in addition to that, there also is, there were identified some code issues with the rigging system, which is just how the light bars are hung above the ceiling and above the stage. So a significant cost there added of $121,000 for bringing the rigging system up to code. And then in addition to just general price increases and tariffs for the lighting system itself, we are looking for a full kind of rejuvenation of that space. So this would include curtains and front stage curtains, and then the whatever the traveler curtains are called, or whatever behind the main stage curtain. And it's full lighting replacement within the auditorium itself. So the architectural lighting, and the wall sconces, seat lighting, and the aisleways. So it's every piece of light is going to be replaced, along with obviously the professional grade lighting and the lighting board and system. So I wanted to present it tonight. This is preliminary because it is still being processed through the cooperative purchasing agreement that we're taking part in, which is a TIPS contract, which is a national organization that we can participate in to avoid the bid process. So once we get approval through, final approval through TIPS, because they review and make sure that the pricing is accurate that Barbizon is giving us, then we would issue final contract signature and that type of thing. But this is all time sensitive because we are trying to get this work done, primarily done in the summer. It's not going to happen probably fully in the summer, so we're going to have to work through that, opening day and start of school and all of that stuff with this work not being complete. But it is important that we move forward now, you know, in an effort to try and beat the, you know, winter holiday stuff and all the stuff that goes on at the auditorium. So I hope that, hope I did covered all my bases, no script here. But Ms. Jones is going to talk about, obviously, significant difference from the original quote and what that might look like and how we're going to request that the board consider covering it.
So that difference from what we have approved and funded through the capital budget is $294,158.75. So if the board wants to move forward with the rigging system, the lighting system, and, you know, adding the architectural lighting, that's the amount that we would need to cover. So I think we have 2 to 3 options. One would be, we see if there's room in this year's 2025 budget, funded out of surplus from this year. One would be we wait and designate some of our fund balance. So that's like a formal, we're designating a certain amount of our fund balance to pay for this in the FY26 year. The third is we could add it to our FY26 budget, but then we'd have to take something else out of our FY26 budget to make that happen. So those are our primary funding vehicles.
Can I ask you, do you have plans for this year's potential surplus already? Has that already been pre-spent? And are we already going into our fund balance for our FY26 budget?
Great questions. I certainly have plans for some of our fund balance. That's part of balancing our FY26. There are 2 things going on, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes when we get to that point on the agenda. But yes, I do have some plans. I'll go into some details. And I think we currently have plan to use for next year $811,000 of our roughly $6 million fund balance coming into the year. And as I guess testified is the wrong word, but as I shared with the county council when I went there last week, I mean, I do anticipate more money coming into fund balance from a surplus from this year. And we are working really hard to identify that. There's just, this time of year, there's a lot of things up in the air. So I think we definitely have enough to cover what we need to cover from next year's budget that we want to move back into this year. So I think we could, I think we could potentially find the money in this year's surplus. The one other thing I'll point out is we also have a project in our capital funds, a set aside of money for turf fields. So, that we keep that as is, or the board could say we want to reappropriate some or all of that. I would have to then, if that's something you want to do, then I have to talk to the county council about if that's a possibility.
It sounds like the most amenable approach to you would be using our surplus from this year.
I think it's less complicated than designating our fund balance for next year. And I think we have room. And I think really what we need to understand is if you definitely want to move forward, then we'll figure out a way to make it work. And if I get to the end of, if I come to you in June and say, I could only fit half of it in there, or I couldn't fit any of it in there, then we might need to think about using some of our fund balance. I really do think we'll have enough money this year.
I'm not sure why there, oh, go ahead. I'm not sure why there was a pause in between 2023 to now with the lighting system, if it was a funding issue or something else going on.
Yeah, so it is always difficult. I will admit that. Number one, getting these budgetary numbers from vendors this far out, and then to get them to update it when we're looking at a TIPS usage of a TIPS governmental contract. Just like we are right now, we're waiting on kind of final numbers. But this is 99% sure at this point that this dollar amount is correct. And that's why it's preliminary. But ultimately, I hope that helps answer your question. It is just a matter of, it's a very specialized system. So there's not a lot of vendors that do it. And then to use a TIPS contract, some of the stuff is being, is requiring a special process to go through to get TIPS approval. So it's a tough thing to get.
Okay, great. I just didn't want to make sure that we vote on something tonight and then it's another couple of years before things take place. And then the other thing I wanted to say is I volunteer with the theater group, and I think it would at least allow the theater group not to have to put so much into the plays that they put on that really bring the community together for, the plays that a lot of us attend. That's one thing. Secondly is I'm not sure when the lighting group would come in, but there is a lot of things in backstage that prevent movement, that prevents the students from their changing and even bringing supplies in and out. Is there any plans to clear that space?
Short answer, yes. The longer answer is that part of the equipment is the risers that are used by, band and chorus, and they have to have a place to be stored, and so oftentimes that is the stage. That back garage area does need a good cleaning. I will admit that. But once again, storage in schools is always a difficult thing. It's just not a lot of it, so we have to find a place to put some of that stuff, extra desks, extra chairs, supplies, whatever. But yes, we do need to clean it up, and we're going to have to clean it up in order to allow room for the contractor to install this.
Okay, great. Because I witnessed a lot of boxes with papers, old desks that some of them didn't have legs. I've actually watched desks actually fall over on older gentlemen who were trying to help. So those types of things are a problem.
Can I clarify? This has kind of been out there in the world for a long time. Who owns the auditorium? Is it an Easton High School auditorium? Is it a Talbot County auditorium? Because it leads to larger questions about the general upkeep. And while I am thrilled that we're talking about the lighting system, there is a whole lot more in that auditorium that we could be talking about and have sort of talked about in the past. And I think, the crux of the issue is who is supposed to be paying for the upkeep of all of this?
So that's a complicated question, and I don't know. I will say that I don't know the full history, except for I know when it was constructed. It was, as it's aptly named, the Talbot County Auditorium. Since that time, though, it really is part of the school. The IAC recognizes it as part of our school. There's no separation, so we have full control. And so it was one of those things that I do believe that when it was initially built, there was some level of thought that it was going to be managed by the county, but that has not panned out, and so it is ours.
Okay, so respectfully, could we evaluate what it is used for, what is stored there, what is happening, what percentage of the auditorium is currently owned, managed, used, constructed, overseen by Easton High School, and what percentage of it is being used as storage or being owned by the county? And kind of, could we muddle through that hopefully this summer, or could we please get something in writing in a form of a policy or in form of I don't know if it needs to be an MOU, that this is Easton High School property?
So as far as I know, and if you know something that I don't, then, make me aware. But if we're talking about the management of that space and anything that's in it, that is all Talbot County Public Schools. So that is our mess, to Ms. Strawberry's point, that we need to clean up. So oftentimes, though, older building, there's teacher desks that we're going to repair. Some, they get stuck down in the garage. They don't get repaired on time and whatever. We can do better. So we will work on that. And this is not a county issue. This is a Talbot County Public Schools issue.
Okay. Then can I also respectfully ask that we put the auditorium seats on the list for the next budget discussion? Please, please, please.
Yes.
Could you describe how the TIPS process works? Is it a competitive bid process, or what does that entail?
Yes. So, like Sourcewell, TIPS, Omnia, there's multiple, what do we call them? There's an acronym. Yeah. Governmental purchasing agreement. I don't know. But these are recognized by the, number one, by our procurement policy, also recognized by the legislative auditors. So it's an approved procurement process that, smaller LEAs like ourselves can take advantage of. And basically TIPS is they hold a bunch of contracts that have been previously approved. So Barbizon, for instance, has a theatrical lighting contract through them that other governmental agencies can take part of and take part in and benefit from that bid process that they went through originally and get that same pricing. So I have requested and received the original contract master list pricing so that I can compare what Barbizon is quoting us versus what they originally bid. And then, as an added check and balance, we submit our purchase order to TIPS, not to Barbizon, and they verify that the information is correct and then send it on to the vendor. So it's a way for us, without a large professional staff, especially in a very specialized application like this, where we would have to pay significant money to design and go through a bid process. It helps us avoid some of those costs.
What does TIP?
They've already established pricing, and then we can work within that.
I
quick
personally
question.
think we need
Did,
to move forward with it. I'm sorry.
If our theater director had a say in any of this?
No, that's a good question. And actually, I've sent the proposal. And so Mr. Vitanovic actually, this is the vendor that he uses for his temporary stage lighting. So that's how we got in contact with this company. So, and I've sent the proposal to him for review. And so, yes. And so this, just to be clear on this is a consent agenda item. So I at the board meeting, we would be asking for this approval as part of that consent agenda. So we don't need it here tonight, but wanted to include it as a discussion point.
And maybe to clarify, we say that, if funding, to be funded with 2025 funds would be the plan. Yeah.
Ms. Bridges, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just want to say, I think we really need to move forward with this because it is such a fire hazard. We're using those old computers, and I'm very glad he brought that to our attention. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to unfinished business. We're going to talk about the budget with Mrs. Jones.
So there are a few things, and then I'm going to talk about the budget timeline. We still are in a holding pattern for final revenue numbers. So that prevents us from today, working on finalizing our budget. The county council will, and so what you'll see is back on April 15th, the county council introduced the countywide budget. On May 6th, they had some public hearings somewhere in there. Dr. Einhorn, Dr. Papakai, and myself went and answered questions and kind of gave our pitch. On June 2nd, what's not on there is on May 27th, the county council is going to vote on the budget. So between now and May 27th, there's still time for the county council to consider possibly increasing what they've put in the budget for us, which is that required minimum local share. And we've put in that plea for some additional funding for, additional positions and for increases for our staff. So they're deliberating on that. And on May 27th, they will vote and they will say, this is our final budget. So that's kind of when we will know this is how much local funding we're going to get. What we also don't have at this time is the state revenue number. We have what they gave us in February, then the January, then the governor gave us, a budget that had a lot of changes and was hotly debated. And ultimately for FY26, there really isn't a budget impact. There is some impact in outlying years. But so I feel like our numbers are good with the caveat that I was actually at a meeting with all the CFOs across the state today, and we were talking about it. And the one thing MSDE has said is, there's some problems with some of your enrollment data for one or two of the programs. I don't know if Talbot County has a problem. I don't know what their problems are. I think internally they're having a problem reconciling what certain counties have submitted versus. I think we're in good shape. A lot of times when they make those announcements, it has nothing to do with us. I feel like our data is really good. I don't really know what problems they're alluding to. So I think in general, we know what our state revenue is. Could be a little bit of a change, but I think in general, we're pretty good. So back to the timeline. May 27th, they deliver. That's a Tuesday. By the following Monday, we will have a letter from the county council saying, Talbot County, here's what we're giving you for your operating budget. Here's what we're giving you for your capital budget. So on June 4th, I am required to give them in advance a look at the budget transfers I want for this year. So for those of you new to the board, one of the ways we sometimes manage to make some cuts to the budget for the next year is we identify things that we could pay early. We don't necessarily actually pay the vendor. I mean, I'm not paying in advance for things that haven't been delivered. I don't want anyone to think that. But we will cut a purchase order to let the vendor know we are locked in. We're going to buy this from you. So a little bit of a timing problem. I have to give the proposal that I have of how to use any savings we have this year to the county council 5-6 days in front of the work session where we're going to be talking about those items, but that's when the county council has requested them. So I'm going to do that and just say these are our draft budget transfers to be voted on next week. Then on June 9th at the board work session, that's when you're going to actually vote. So normally we don't do votes at the work session, but in this case we're going to need to vote on the budget transfers, and we will also talk about how that interplays with the FY26 budget adjustments we need to make now that we know our final revenue numbers. Because the next night, Tuesday the 10th, is when the county council is going to have that budget, is going to have their regular meeting, and I would go and say, those budget transfers I sent to you last week, our board voted, they approved them, or they approved them with such and such change, and so this is what I'm asking you to approve for us. And then on Wednesday night, June 11th, you will finalize the FY26 budget based largely on how the county council voted the night before and what we discussed on Monday night's work session. Does that make sense? It's a little bit cart before the horse, but if we don't do it this way, then we have to wait until June 24th to go to the county council. That gives you would have to have a special board meeting to approve the budget, a lot of things. And it gives us very, very little time to kind of execute the final details of the budget and get it into MSDE by June 30th. So I just wanted to share that with you. See, I know it's, you know, it's a little out of order.
I think that we have had some very good discussions about the budget thus far, and I think that for the most part, we're all on the same page directionally, and so I would say I feel comfortable with this as planned. We will have to vote us into open session in work session in order to do that. So procedurally, it'll be a little different, but
Well,
order
I think
to
we
vote.
checked to make sure we could vote on this at the work session, and they said, okay.
I
Oh,
think-
no, the actual FY26 budget, yeah, I mean, I think that
no,
makes
for the
sense.
work session, I think that we will have to be in open session
Yes.
to vote. So procedurally, for anybody listening, it's going to be slightly different than a normal work session.
Right.
However, it's already on the calendar, it's already advertised.
This is an open session right now, right? So it's, yeah,
So, yep.
advertised, et cetera. Just would need to be on our agenda, I think, and so it's clear.
So obviously, when I, you know, I will just, I will definitely not give something to the county council I'm not at least simultaneously giving you in terms of here's my suggested budget category transfers. I will be back on June 2nd, and at that point, we'll have the information we need. So it's going to be a little bit of a scramble for finance to move from, I mean, we have ideas. We have Plan A through Plan F, you know. So we have ideas of how to move all the things. So that's going to be fine. But, you know, we'll get it sent out to you as well on June 4th.
Thank you for your good planning of figuring out how all this works in the timeline. That's very helpful. One question I had, and I don't know if it's an appropriate question for this point in the work session or if it's a negotiation-related question and not appropriate. But when we were at the county council hearing, some folks asked me later, okay, the county employees are getting this amount of salary increase. How does that relate to what the Talbot County Public Schools employees receive?
Right, that's not something we could talk about publicly. I mean, we are in the midst of negotiations. We haven't settled. We don't have a table agreement. So, yeah, that's not something we could talk about at this point.
I think what they were asking, though, and yeah, I can talk about this later, but whether when the county council puts that in their budget, whether that covered the TCPS employees, and I thought not. So
It
I
does
just
not.
wanted to
It covers
verify
their other departmental
Yes,
employees,
okay.
and
That
they
was
don't
what
have
I-
unionized. That's
Right, that's
they
what I
they get
wanted
to
to
decide
clarify.
what they're giving with no input from other outside bodies.
Right, okay. That's all I was really clarifying was that, so that people understood that that did not cover the Talbot County Public Schools.
Right. We have our own independent negotiations. Yep.
And I just want to go on record thanking the community members that did come out on May 6th. Gosh, it seemed like it was like yesterday. But May 6th at our public budget hearing and in support of us. So I just want to publicly thank, I know, Ms. Jackson, you also stood up and represented the board. And so just want to thank people that came out on behalf of TCPS.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Jones. You're up next too, with the Marathon Health Center update.
Okay. Okay, so when last I gave you an update, we had received notification from U.S. Department of Education that we needed to cease and desist all spending on any ESSER-funded and Maryland Leads funded projects, which we did. Subsequently, we got an invoice from Marathon for around $81,000 for work they had done that they had not yet billed us for. So we have submitted, the instruction we received from Maryland State Department of Education was hold on to that. We cannot pay that until something changes. So on Monday, we received notification from U.S. Department of Ed through MSDE that they were opening for a very brief period of time that funding window in which we could ask for reimbursements. So we submitted 2 invoices. One invoice was for about $81,000, and that was for cost that the contractor and Marathon had put into the project that they had not yet been paid for. And then we put in another invoice in that they pretty quickly rejected, and that was for the remaining build-out cost, startup cost, and the operating cost that we had originally written into the grant. Because the grant was originally supposed to run much longer, and those costs would have been within the grant period. And the answer we got was, well, now they're not in the grant period, and you haven't incurred these. These are still to come, and we will therefore not be paying them. So, we had some conversations with MABE, and MABE offered us initially $250,000 and has now increased it to $300,000 in funds to help us cover costs, primarily construction cost. And based on what we've paid and what MABE is offering, I believe that would more than cover our construction cost. Marathon Health has come to us and has said they are willing to not bill us for any more of the build out. Some of these are conflicting or overlapping, I guess I would say. Marathon has said, we will not bill you for any more startup cost or construction cost. We are willing to absorb those with the caveat that you extend the agreement from a 5-year agreement to a 7-year agreement. So they want some additional time with us. So that's an option to save some costs now. And then I also have some funds available through the ESMIC Health Alliance, which is how that cooperative group that we purchase our health insurance through. We have some reserve funds sitting in there. So we pay money in, claims get paid out from that health alliance, or they used to. And we've had some savings. They're invested. They've done well. Every county has a certain amount of surplus. It's important we maintain some surplus because we might have a year with very, very high claims. We're self-insured. We need that cushion. So that's separate and apart from our fund balance. So we have a little over $800,000 that we could use for a purpose. I wouldn't want to use them all, but we could use some of that funding to help with our operating cost. A year's worth of operating cost is about $750,000. It's $62,000 a month. The idea being that at a certain point in our life, our relationship with Marathon, we would begin to see savings in the health claims flowing through our insurance because our employees are receiving excellent care through the clinic and more preventative care. Some of the more expensive things that are going through insurance right now maybe cut down. So that was always the idea, the trade-off is we do some investing up front and then we have this trade-off. So those are all the things, and I'm just throwing that out there for consideration. Marathon is very happy to come talk to us. There is a lawsuit. I don't know a lot about it, but it's a multi-state lawsuit, I believe, where people are suing regarding this issue. I don't know who is suing who, but it's around this issue, trying to get the funding open back up. So if that were to, no, what I mean is some state educational aid, people that were the beneficiaries of these funds are suing the government to open the funding window back up to its original funding window. And if that were to be successful or the window were to stay open, then we would have access to those funds again. It's just really hard. There's about a 2-week period right now. I mean, we can't just pick up the phone, call the contractor, hey, you can come in for 8 to, they're doing things and we've got to get back on the schedule. So we can't really engage them to start back up without having a longer funding window. So those are kind of where we are right now. I'm just really here to inform you. I guess
no.
I really wanted to take the temperature of the room and get everyone's thoughts about some of these options.
My husband utilizes the one in Queen Anne County, and it's just wonderful. He just sings praises, they all do. And I think it's something that, you know, can benefit our teachers here in Talbot County. I mean, who here has not been able to get a doctor's appointment recently, right?
Well, no question it's a benefit. It's just a question of tough budget times, you know, and you guys have to decide resource allocation.
Does this interfere with our lights for the auditorium?
Two questions. One was, I think when you originally told us about this, there was another amount that was kind of in a limbo, and it was maybe 121,000 or so that we had, that was in process, that we hadn't yet either submitted for reimbursement or was hanging out there in limbo. And has that piece also been included in this?
I need to get back to you on that. I do recall that. That wasn't necessarily related. I don't believe that was related to Marathon. That was other items charged to the ESSER funding. There were 4 items. It's all coming back to me. And those are, a couple of those are never going to happen. One of those was us purchasing a bus. So that's outside the 121, but there were a couple of things in the 121. One was we owed, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, one was we had a final installment payable to the consultant we're working with on our strategic plan. We also had, so that was that. And what was the other piece? We just paid it this week, and I can't think what it, I think the 81,000 was related to Marathon. There were a couple other things under this ESSER funding, separate from Marathon. We're going to use it to pay for a bus. So we currently have an order. There's a very long lead time to order a school bus. So we currently have 3 school buses on order that'll get delivered in the fall next year. Good news is I had put all 3 of those buses in next year's budget, so that is factored in. But I had also put one of those buses into the ESSER grant, and it was approved. So I was like, great, I'll be able to cut down our budget for next year by 1 bus. But we will never get that bus unless the law changes and they open it back up. We can't get that bus in the next 2 weeks. So I can't really do anything about that.
Well, that's what I was wondering, if the 121,000 was included in this, get it in the window.
Yeah. No, anything we can get in the window.
While they opened up the window, because those were things I thought we had already
incurred. Yeah. So anything we've incurred, we are getting in the window. The one other thing that was in the ESSER funding that is not going to make it in the window, it's just not going to happen with ESSER money, is the activity court at Easton Elementary. So that is something, I'll let Kevin talk about that. I mean, there are, again, the board has the option to use, the cost on that's 120, no, it's not that much. 60?
77, I think. Yeah.
Can I ask another clarifying question? Originally, we had talked about 1 court, and then we had said, well, really, we need 2, and one of them will be covered by a grant. Is this the one that we're speaking about? Is there another grant? Is this the second one? Are there no activity courts? Where are we?
So we were able to purchase the play area that's basically like an artificial turf. But the basketball court area, there were 2 originally, down to 1, down to 0. So there's no, we're at 0. So we would not have been able to get permitting for 2. Yeah, so because of the impervious surfaces on that campus, there was a whole nother level of permitting that we would have had to have gotten to. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it would have been a lot more work and cost. So we did get one court approved. It is, able to move forward. It's just the funding obviously isn't there.
Did we make that one larger, or is it, we got as much as we can get?
As much as we can get.
Okay.
Yep. We went to the max amount that we could.
What exactly does that encompass?
It's really just a blacktop area for a basketball court and or, soccer or whatever you wanted to play on it.
So, is it similar to what they have out at Idlewild Park, where they had a guy recently come in, it was a couple years ago, and the Arts Council covered part of that grant, I believe, or the whole thing? I can't recall. It was a couple years ago.
Yeah, they just did had an artist do the painting on the court. Yeah.
But we need a whole new court.
Correct, yeah.
Going back to my second question relating to Marathon. So I wasn't here, when the board originally discussed this. I know I heard some of the discussions along the way of, what the intent was as far as a benefit for teachers. I don't know if the teachers know about this, if it was something that they'd asked for. I guess it's also, it seems like since a year ago, our budgetary climate has changed considerably. And that is my concern about it, is that it looks like a lot of money for the operating costs at this point. For something that if we knew that, yes, in year one, it is going to save us $750,000, or even if we knew that in year one, it was going to save us $500,000, and we think that possibly on down the road, it's going to save us more. It's just that in this budgetary time, knowing how things stand and the things that we're looking at in the future and the things that we're trying to accomplish, I wonder whether it is a benefit, if it is, say, for the teachers, that they would most see as a benefit, given the high cost of it. I guess that is my concern, is the cost, and is there a cost benefit that still makes sense in this climate?
Could we, I've asked this in the past, and this is really a Mrs. Brundage question, could we go back and find the meetings at which we were presented to and this was discussed, because there's some very specific information that I think would be helpful to any board member who missed this discussion and any community member who has questions about this right now, to get everybody on the same playing field.
Yeah, and Marathon would be happy to come back and speak, do a short version of the presentation as well. I think what you're suggesting is a great, and that may be enough, or they would be happy to come back. I just want to, slightly change two things that Ms. Darius was saying, and that is, just to be clear, it's not, it's a benefit for all staff, not just teachers. So I just want to make that, very clear, as well as our retirees and their dependents. So it's broad. I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to change. Oh, it was never expected that, we would see an immediate cost savings. It's the kind of thing where you have to get your utilization up. You've got to spread the word. People need to start using it. And then there are longer term benefits that kick in. They estimate the break-even point with the savings in your insurance plan start around middle of the second operating year. And so the beauty of the ESSER and LEADS funding, it's actually primarily LEADS, Maryland LEADS, was that it would cover the operating cost up until the point at which Marathon estimated we would be seeing some real savings. So that was the neat part about the funding. But
I think, to speak to Mrs. Darius's point and to the community at large who is asking a lot of the same questions, while we are a nice board and we appreciate our teachers very much, we want to give them all sorts of benefits and pluses, this was really a dollar sign, a bottom line thing. We were going to see significant savings, as proven by Marathon. They have the numbers all spelled out in a rather short period of time for the amount of investment. I would say 1 to 2 years was a pretty quick turnaround to be generating some significant savings. And I think that that was a driving force between why the board, or to sort of force the board's hand to moving forward as quickly as we did. And I'm looking around to see who was here. Mrs. Bridges, I think, you know, we both were very vocally in support of this for a lot of reasons. And I think that that was one of them, you know, dollars and cents, it made sense.
I think I would like to see Marathon come and talk with us. I think that would be helpful for me as a healthcare professional and a leader in the healthcare world, because a lot of the things that I was looking for, I did not see. And I think as far as like regulatory bodies, you know, where does the reimbursement come from? If we're talking about cost savings, is that a cost savings with an insurance company that Marathon already works for? Have we looked at the 5-year projection plans of both Luminous Health and University of Maryland, and how does that benefit? Are Marathon facilities in just rural, remote areas? Because how does that compare with the cost savings? Things like that I would like to know more about.
I think it would be really helpful if you wouldn't mind kind of putting some of those questions in an email to me that I could share with them so they could kind of prep a presentation to make sure they address those. That's great. And to be one thing I can say, which may give you a little more background, is they don't use any insurance. It's totally outside of insurance. So their only fee is what they're getting from us, which is that monthly $62,000 a month, basically. That covers everyone. So the patient walks in free of charge, and then they're not getting any supplemental insurance reimbursement.
Yeah, I saw that. However, their presentation was that we would see significant cost savings from the insurance company. But how do we know that? What is the relationship there? Is that based on trends? You know, is that based on a certain insurance company? And then there's other things such as, I think I read something about they do not do immunizations or wellness visits for young children. Well, what does that really mean when we're talking about regulations? So it's a little different. Like what classifies a dependent? You know, all those types of things I would like to know a little bit more about.
We have a lot of that spelled out in our contract, and we've worked through a lot of that.
Great. I'll write my questions down, and maybe you can slide me the contract, and maybe some of that might be already in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to know how much more for construction do we owe if we went forward?
I got an estimate today from them. I have not vetted it. I said, it's not so much the construction. Construction is paid up, if you will. The bigger issue is there is a space that's been half renovated that's under lease. So there are lease costs and there are return this to a usable condition costs. And I have an estimate from them that I just received today. I've asked to see a copy of their lease. I want to know what they're on the hook for. And then I need legal on our side to review it to see if they agree with that estimate.
Can I ask one more question? The $300K from MABE, is that a gift or is it a loan?
It's a gift. It's a grant. I believe it's a grant they got from the Maryland General Assembly. You know, they got it and they're willing to give it to us.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Jones. Any questions about anything we've talked about tonight? Okay, going once, going twice. Sold to no bidders. With that, we will close this meeting and we will see you all back on Wednesday for our regular session.